in this case study, we're going to focus on Australia, and particularly the decriminalization of marijuana use in an Australian state. So in the Australian Controlled Substances Act of 1984, they defined a simple cannabis offense. Essentially, it was cannabis for personal use, so smoking in a private home, having one plant, possessing equipment, possessing small amounts of the substance. All of that was defined as a simple cannabis offense. In 1987, the state of South Australia, so one state within the country of Australia, said that if someone commits a simple cannabis offense, instead of arrest, a police officer can give them a cannabis expiation notice, essentially a parking ticket or a speeding ticket. They functioned in the same way. So what they did, what a SEN was, a cannabis expiation notice, was a fine. And if the person paid this fine, paid this fee, within 4 weeks, 28 days, they had no criminal record. So what these SENs did was effectively decriminalized cannabis possession. And rather than possession having a criminal penalty, such as jail time, it had a fine. It was literally the same as a parking ticket. Now, other states have implemented depenalization, which would be just the reduction in severity of criminal penalties, not removing criminal penalties entirely. So maybe there was a 6-month jail time instead of a 1 or 2 year jail time. That was not actually full decriminalization. If they didn't have any fines at all, that would be recreational use and actually legalization. So just to try to differentiate those terms a little bit. But South Australia, they decriminalized marijuana possession using these SENs. And as of February 2016, here's how much it cost if you got caught with marijuana or various types of marijuana and amounts of marijuana. So if you were caught smoking in your home or consuming it another way, it'd be 150 Australian dollars. If you had one plant, it would be 300. If you had 100 grams on you, it would be another $300. If you had a bong on you, it would be 150 or $50 on top of or $30 on top of other expenses. So there was some gradation here. It wasn't just a flat fee, but it wasn't so expensive as to make it restrictive for people. Like, people could still afford these, but there was a little pain involved. So what were some of the effects? Well, this research was published in 2000. Remember, this law was put into effect in the 80s, so while this might be older research, it's certainly relevant to the time period. And this is a chart of the adjusted percent of lifetime cannabis use for all Australian states for each of these years from 85 to 95. And I've highlighted the South Australia, the points for South Australia, which is the red line, which is kind of hidden behind a bunch of other lines. And the point to take out of this is that it's hidden behind a bunch of other lines. You can't actually see South Australia very well. It kind of just blends in. Now, there was an uptick in lifetime cannabis use in 91 and 93, but it's kind of leveled off at the end. And it's certainly not near the top of lifetime prevalence among all the states. We see the same when we look at weekly cannabis use. Now, lifetime prevalence of substance use will always be relatively high, and it's not really a good indicator of current use, who's currently at risk. Weekly cannabis use gives us a much better indicator of who is currently using and who is currently at risk. And what this graph shows, again, South Australia is labeled, it's the red line kind of in the middle, is that once these SENs were put in place, there was an uptick in prevalence. However, over time, the prevalence has slowly diminished. And the weekly prevalence of cannabis use has decreased in this state, even though the prevalence of most of the other provinces has decreased. So now they literally are a middle of the pack state relative to prevalence of weekly cannabis use. Here's another study just showing basically the same information. It's the prevalence of cannabis use by state in each of the years from 88 to 96. South Australia is labeled as SA, kind of right in the middle. You see again that sharp uptick after the SEN law or program was put in place, but then you see this gradual decreasing even though the prevalence of other states were increasing at the same time. So in terms of direct consumptive effects, this decriminalization may have had short-term increases in cannabis use, but over time it may actually have decreased cannabis use. There were some indirect effects of this program as well. So cannabis users in state without SEN programs were more likely to report adverse employment consequences, contact with criminal justice system, relationship problems, and accommodation difficulties. Essentially, because of the SEND programs, people had higher quality of life. They didn't have to deal with the criminal justice system and all the life impacts that working through the criminal justice system imparts on an individual, all the negative consequences of working through the justice system imparts. It also resulted in what's known as net widening. Essentially, more people were caught using and possessing marijuana than ever before. More citations written, and more citations were written than in any other state in terms of compared to the arrests in other states, and more cases were brought into the criminal justice system from people who didn't pay their sin, didn't pay the fine, and then these punitive penalties were brought in. So it actually captured more people using the product illegally and was able to bring more people into the system to get them hopefully to stop. So in summary, the state of South Australia in Australia decriminalized marijuana use. We did see some small short-term increases of use, which mainly occurred for those over 25 years old. But this may have really been temporary. We saw decreases in the years after that, even though other states in Australia saw an increase in their prevalence rates. We had more individuals cited and brought into the criminal justice system than ever before, which should have positive public health benefits. And of those who were cited, they showed more positive health benefits on the quality of their lives than people who were arrested for marijuana possession in other Australian states.